Something was moving in the tree line, keeping pace with them, but it wasn't making a sound. Not on the leaves, not on the gravel, not even on the dry branches. The boy noticed it first. He said it was staying just far enough back that he could never quite see it when he turned his head. But it was there, always there, matching every step they took along the trail. His dad told him to stop talking like that. That was the last thing anyone ever heard him say. If you're still here, listening to this, just stick with me a little longer. I don't tell this kind of thing. I really never have. Most of the guys I worked with would say you don't give shape to something like this. You don't name it, you don't describe it, and you sure don't invite it into words. But I've been carrying this alone for 12 years now, and it just doesn't stay quiet anymore. So, if you're the kind of person who listens all the way through, just make sure you're somewhere you can hear everything around you. Trust me, that matters way more than you think. I was assigned to the West Fork district of the Bitterroot back in late October of 2013. Fire season had just wrapped up, and the tourists were finally thinning out. Most of the traffic up there had shifted from casual hikers to hunters. Elk season draws a totally different kind of quiet into those woods. It's less chatter and a whole lot more weighing. The ranger station I worked out of sat about 6 miles off the main access road. I wasn't exactly new to the job. I'd done search and rescue over in Idaho before transferring out here. You learn to read people's patterns pretty quick. You figure out what folks do when they're scared. The call came in just after sunset on a Thursday. A father and his young son had gone in for a quick weekend hunt. They were supposed to check in with their family by noon. They never did. We found their truck parked at the trailhead. It was covered in a thin layer of frost. The driver's side door was left hanging wide open, like somebody had stepped out in a massive hurry. The keys were still dangling right there in the ignition. Now, that's just not normal behavior. Nobody leaves their truck running with the door open unless something's wrong. We knew we had to move fast. We mobilized before first light. It was just 3 of us at the start. So that meant me, a county deputy named Harris, and a volunteer tracker named Lyle. Lyle knew these trails better than anyone alive. Say, a shivering memory. The weather was clear, but man, it was freezing. Thin frost on the ground. No wind at all. Honestly, it was perfect conditions to track it. Lyle was already reading the dirt before we even geared up. Harris was a younger guy, strictly by the book. He figured we'd find them huddled up by a fire a few miles in. Just another couple of city hunters who got turned around. I kinda hoped he was right. We picked up their trail about half a mile in. It was easy to spot in the frost. 2 sets of prints, moving with a consistent stride. No signs of distress or panic at first. They had stayed right on the marked path, heading deeper toward a ridge where the elk usually move. Everything looked completely standard. Until we hit the 2-mile mark. That's where things changed. The strides started getting shorter. The steps got closer together, kind of uneven. They had slowed down and started hesitating. About 2 miles in, things started to change. The strides we were following got shorter, kind of uneven, like they'd slowed down and started hesitating. There were spots where the prints overlapped, like the dad had stepped back toward his boy or circled her. It was a protective movement. Then we noticed these weird breaks of the trail, small deviations, just a few feet off into the brush. Always to the right side, like he was checking the trees, then changing his mind. We found the first piece of gear just past a bend. The trail dips down into this shallow ravine right there. And sitting right on the edge of it was something bright. It was a single glove, child-sized, just lying there in the frost. And I swear to you, it was still warm when I picked it up.
That shouldn't happen. Not hours after they'd been gone.
Not in that kind of bitter cold.
It just didn't make any sense.
Harris tried to rationalize it. He said maybe they hadn't been out there as long as we thought. Figured the timeline had to be off. But Lyle didn't agree. He wasn't even listening to Harris.
He just stood there, looking into the trees on that right side of the trail.
Real quiet.
I asked him what he saw.
He didn't say a word.
But he didn't take his eyes off that spot for a long time. He knew something was out there.
We pushed on.
And the deeper we went, the quieter it got.
Not just the usual forest quiet. This was different.
Even our own gear sounded muted, like the air was too heavy.
The deeper we went, the quieter it got.
Not just your usual forest quiet either.
This was different. No birds. No wind moving through the canopy.
Even our own gear sounded kind of muted, like the air was just too heavy.
We started hearing it about another mile in. Footsteps. And they definitely weren't ours. They matched our pace, always off to the right. Far enough back that we couldn't see a damn thing, but close enough to hear the rhythm.
Harris called it out first.
He tried to play it off, said maybe it was another search party coming in from a different angle. But he checked the radio, and the comms were totally clear.
Nobody else was in our sector.
So we stopped moving to listen. Just froze right there on the trail. And the second we did, the footsteps stopped too. Whatever it was watching us. That's when Lyle turned around. He looked right at me and said, "We're not following them anymore." I asked him what the hell he meant.
He didn't say a word.
He just pointed down at the ground. There was only one set of tracks now. Adult-sized. The smaller prints had just ended. No scuffle, no drag marks, no sign of a fall. They just stopped mid-stride, like the boy took a step that never came down. So we immediately spread out and searched the area. We were looking for anything. A disturbance in the brush, broken branches, blood, anything to make it make sense. But there was nothing. Just the dad's footprints keeping on. It made no sense. How does a kid just vanish into thin air while walking right next to his dad? And why did the father just keep walking? Just one set of prints, heading deeper into the trees. While we were trying to figure that out, Lyle was looking off to the right, back toward where we heard those footsteps. He found another pattern in the pine needles, but they weren't clear enough to call tracks. They were just these deep depressions in the frost. Too spaced out. Too inconsistent. It didn't look like an animal, and it sure as hell didn't look human. It looked like something learning how to walk. We should have pulled back right then and there. Protocol says you call in more people and widen the search when things get weird. But we didn't do that. Because about 20 minutes later, we heard him. It was the boy, calling out for his dad. It was clear as day, coming from maybe 50 yards deeper into the trees. Harris didn't even hesitate for a second. He just broke off and started moving straight toward the sound of that voice. I instinctively took a step to follow him into the brush. But before I could, Lyle grabbed my arm, hard. He wasn't moving an inch. He just looked at me, his face completely pale like he'd seen a ghost. He leaned in and told me that's not where the tracks go. The father's prints were right in front of us, but the kid's voice was coming from way off to the right. I looked down at the mud, and he was absolutely right. The father's heavy footprints kept going straight down the main trail. But that voice was echoing from the exact same side where we heard those mimicking footsteps. Harris didn't care. He just kept going. He pushed his way through this incredibly thick patch of brush, heading completely off the trail.
He was just desperate to find that kid.
We lost sight of him for just a few seconds.
The woods out there are so dense and foggy, they just swallow you up the minute you step off the path.
And then, as fast as it started, everything went silent again.
There was no voice calling out.
No footsteps crunching in the brush.
Just absolute dead nothing. Lyle and I just stood there, frozen on the trail.
We were waiting for Harris to call out, or for the boy to make another sound.
But the woods were completely dead. We waited 10 minutes. 10 of the longest minutes of my life.
When he didn't come back, Lyle and I finally went in after him. The brush was so thick, it felt like it was pushing back.
We found him about 30 yards off the trail.
He was just standing there in this little clearing. He wasn't moving, wasn't making a sound, just staring dead ahead at a cluster of trees. I called his name, but he didn't even blink. It was like he couldn't hear me at all. I walked up right next to him, trying to see what had him so spooked. I looked exactly where he was looking. I expected to see a kid, or maybe a bear, but there was nothing there. Just empty trees and that heavy freezing fog. Then I looked down at the ground right in front of us. It was completely torn up. Dozens of footprints, all adult-sized, just circling in these tight, crazy loops, like something had been pacing over and over. But that wasn't the worst part. So, a grim discovery. Mixed in with the boot prints were these other marks. They were deeper, heavier. They weren't shaped like boots, and they sure as hell weren't animal tracks. Suddenly, Harris just gasped, like he'd been holding his breath the whole time. He blinked hard, snapping out of whatever trance he was in. He looked at me, and the guy was practically ghost white. He pointed right at that empty spot in the trees. His hand was shaking. He swore to me he'd just seen the boy standing right there. Said the kid was looking right at him, begging for help. But then his voice dropped. He said something was wrong with the kid. Really wrong. Said his arms were hanging way too long, past his knees. And his head. It was tilted at an angle no neck could hold. That was it for me. I grabbed his jacket and we pulled back right then and there. We got the hell out of that brush and back to the trail. We needed dogs, choppers, everything. We were out of our depth. We pulled back immediately after that. Called in more units, dogs, aerial support. We threw everything we had at those woods. But it didn't matter. They never found the boy. It was like the forest just swallowed him whole. They found the father 2 days later. He was about 3 miles from where we had originally lost his trail. He was just sitting there at the base of a tree. His back was against the trunk and his eyes were wide open. There were no signs of injury at all. No exposure damage. No struggle. The coroner listed the cause of death as cardiac arrest. But his face... I've seen fear before. Real fear. The kind that comes from knowing you're about to die. This wasn't that. This was something else entirely. It was a look of pure, unadulterated terror. His eyes were completely fixed on the tree line to his right, staring into the dark. And his mouth was open just enough that it looked like he'd been about to say something. Or maybe call out to someone. We closed the case as a missing person with a fatality. Standard report. Lyle transferred out a month later, and he wouldn't say why. Harris stopped taking field assignments after that. He requested desk duty and never went back out. Said the woods made him feel watched. As for me, I stayed. I kept telling myself it was just one bad case. Just one set of circumstances we didn't understand. But then, about 6 months later, I started noticing something. I'd be out walking the trails alone.
And the quiet wouldn't feel right. I'd hear it sometimes. Just the faint crunch of pine needles. Footsteps. Off to the right. Matching my pace. And if I stopped, they'd stop too. Not a second later.
Just dead, heavy silence.
I never looked directly into the trees when it happened.
Not anymore.
I knew better than to give it my attention. Because the one time I did, I couldn't help myself.
I just had to know what was following me.
I thought I saw someone standing between the trunks, just far enough away that I couldn't make out their face.
Hidden in the shadows.
But close enough to see their posture.
Head tilted.
Arms hanging a little too long at their sides. And I swear, it was trying to stand the way I do. Like it was learning. I just stood there, completely frozen. The cold was biting, but I couldn't feel it. It wasn't just watching me out there. It was studying me, trying to figure out how to be us. I took one slow, deliberate step backward. I didn't want to give it a reason to close the distance. It didn't move a muscle. It just held that broken stance, letting me retreat. I forced my head to turn back around. I locked my eyes on the dirt path ahead and told myself to keep moving. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. I started walking faster, almost jogging. Every crunch of my boots sounded deafening in that heavy silence. I kept straining my ears, waiting for that second set of footsteps to start up again. But the woods stayed dead quiet. It didn't follow me this time. It was almost like it was satisfied with what it had seen, and just let me walk away. When I finally made it back to the trailhead, the sun was already dipping behind the ridge. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so bad I'd dropped them in the dirt. Defensive action. I locked the doors the second I got inside. I just sat there, staring out the window at the tree line.
I kept wondering who it was going to practice on next.
I never put any of this in an official report.
Superstitious warning. You don't give something like that a name on paper.
Say, if you write it down, people go out there looking for it. But I look at the map of the West Fork District every single day.
I know exactly where that ridge is. I've got a boundary drawn in my head.
People ask why I didn't transfer out.
I stay because someone's got to know where not to send people. Someone has to steer them away from that part of the woods.
But then, about 6 months later, I started noticing something. When I was out walking the trails alone, I'd hear it sometimes. Footsteps. Just off to the right side of the trail. Matching my pace. Step for step, like an echo. And if I stopped walking, they'd stop too. Just this heavy, unnatural silence, waiting for me to move again. It was like playing a sick game of Simon Says. I made a strict rule for myself after that. I never looked directly into the trees when it happened. Not anymore. I knew better than to give it what it wanted. I'd just keep my eyes locked straight ahead. I'd focus on the dirt in front of me and just keep walking, even when every instinct screamed at me to run. Because the one time I did look, the one time I couldn't stop myself from turning my head, I saw exactly why the others left. I thought I saw someone standing between the trunks, just far enough away that I couldn't make out their face in the shadows. Just a dark shape blending into the pines. But they were close enough for me to see their posture. Their head was tilted at this awful angle, and their arms were hanging a little too long at their sides. It wasn't just watching me like a predator watches prey. It was learning, practicing how to be one of us. And I swear to God, as I stood there frozen, it was trying to stand the exact same way I do,